And thanks for joining us for our next session, Grow Big or Go Home, How Social Enterprises Take Off. The session is going to be led by our Director of Account Management, Stina Rubin. And we're also honored to be joined by Mary Boak of Teach for America, John Thomas of Tap Cancer Out, and Jeannie Hansaker of the Exodus Road. And what all three organizations have in common is that they were all honored on our Classy 100 list of fastest growing nonprofit partners. So I'm going to hand it off to Stina, but if you'll hold any questions till the end, I'll be coming around with a Q&A. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Allison. So as Allison mentioned, all of these organizations were part of our Classy 100. And the Classy 100 I don't know if anybody has seen Dr. Ben along the way, but Dr. Ben is our data scientist, and he put together this growth score and basically looked at a couple of key factors, including how often organizations were seeing month-over-month growth, whether that was sustainable growth, and kind of what that growth overall looked like, and created a score against kind of this benchmark of what we see in annual trends in fundraising. So all three of these organizations were on our Classy 100 growth. And obviously from our data science perspective, we're looking at growth on online fundraising in the Classy platform itself. So just to give a little bit of context of like how these guys are here and what we're here to talk about today, I think one of the things that I'm most excited about in looking at the preparation that we did for the panel today is that all of these guys bring such different perspectives on growth and what growth is. So we're going to start off by just learning a little bit about each of these organizations and then go into what they see as growth, and then a little bit around the challenges and the roadblocks that sometimes happen around growth and some lessons learned. So hopefully getting to a spot that you guys have some takeaways in terms of growth for your organizations themselves. So to kick us off, if Jeannie, you want to talk a little bit about Exodus Road?
Sure. So can you hear me? Am I there? All right. Can you hear me now? My name's Jeannie Hansaker. I'm the Vice President of Advancement for the Exodus Road. We're about a $2.2 million organization. We are in counter-human trafficking, and we find and free victims of human trafficking all over the world. In the 5 years that we've been in existence, we have found and rescued 800 victims of human trafficking, most of them children and women in the sex industry. And we have assisted in the arrest of almost 300 traffickers. So really excited to be a part of this panel and to talk with these folks today.
My name is John Thomas. I'm the Executive Director and founder of Tap Cancer Out. We're a very niche nonprofit. We were born actually at the 2010 Classy Awards. I was very inspired and came up with the idea to unite the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community in my passion for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and I guess my hatred of cancer and desire to do something about it. So we empower and mobilize the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community to raise awareness and funds for cancer fighting organizations. We're currently partnered with the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, which is my purple bracelet right here. But previously we've supported St. Baldrick's in pediatric cancer in 4 of their grants, and also the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So Classy has really, we owe everything to Classy, our existence to Classy, but also the ability for us to layer the fundraising element on top of the traditional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament model. So we primarily, our revenues primarily come from our fundraising tournaments. We're hosting 5 this year. We add about 1 every year, but it gives the competitors not only a way to take part in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament, which they do all the time, but also to fight for those in the fight of their lives, and they get to tell their story and customize their pages and really give them a way to honor those that may be fighting cancer that they might have lost, and to really personalize their fight against cancer with their passion for Jiu-Jitsu.
Hello, my name is Mary Boak, and I am the Senior Vice President of National Development at Teach for America. Excited to be with you all today. Teach for America is a national organization, and we find, develop and then support a network of diverse leaders to expand educational opportunity for children through classrooms, through schools, through systems of schools, and really every sector and field that shapes educational opportunity for children. And we do this through basically 3 different ways. First, which I think most people are most familiar with, is we recruit leaders, young leaders from across the country, and ask them to make a 2-year commitment to teach in schools across our nation. We're in 53 regions across the United States, urban regions, rural regions, here in Boston, over in LA, up in South Dakota. And during those 2 years, we then work to develop them as leaders and as classroom teachers to ensure that they're having a tremendous impact in classrooms with children and to expand educational opportunity for them within the classroom. After the 2 years, our core members, what we call our teachers during their 2 years, become alumni. And what we've found is that although many of our leaders never initially thought that they would stay in education for the long term, in fact only 15% ever thought that they would be in education before joining Teach for America, actually end up staying in education or in work that supports low-income communities, and so become leaders as continued as classroom teachers, as principals, as school system leaders, or in other different sectors such as governors, policymakers, but now working with the experience that they've had in classrooms to actually ensure that educational opportunity is being achieved through the variety of influencers that actually affect our children. And so I'm excited to be here. It's funny being on a growth panel because in many ways Teach for America has actually already achieved scale. We had a pretty aggressive 15-year growth campaign where we went from in 2000 to 2015 an organization that was bringing in about 850 teachers every single year with an alumni base of about 3,500. And since we have fundraisers in the room, about a budget of $10 million a year, to in 2015, when we reached the sort of peak of our growth, to bringing in about 11,000, or having a core of about 11,000 teachers, an alumni base of 37,000, and an annual operating budget of about $320 million. So that's an incredible growth in terms of both our constituency base, our program efforts, as well as the fundraising that we had to accomplish. And so that is, in many ways an example of the growth. I think the reason we've been working with Classy relates more to some of the work we've been doing recently to grow our online giving, as Stina said, and specifically related to how do we now sustain this by growing new communities of funding, new communities of people who want to support our work, specifically our alumni base. And I think we'll get more into that later, but excited to be here.
Awesome, thank you. So to kick us off, I mean, when we say the word growth, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what growth means to you or your organization, and kind of what are you using as that measurement for growth? John, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I can absolutely kick us off. So we see growth in a few different ways. Obviously, there's like internal growth of our organization and the amount of people that are in it. And if you go to our website or you've seen any advertising of ours, which you haven't unless you train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we appear to be quite a massive organization, but we're actually not. It's myself and my wife, and it's a part-time passion. I still have a full-time job otherwise. So we are sort of at the very ground floor of growth there, and we haven't done anything in that respect across the 6 years. But then there's this other side of growth, especially with our events, but otherwise, and we're fiercely passionate about measuring the success of our events, and we do that in a variety of different ways. So of course, not only the number of people competing and how that grows year over year, and tournament over tournament, but also the number of fundraisers, the split between people who just want to pay and compete versus those who would like to fundraise to earn free entry and other perks. The average donation, the average amount raised by each fundraiser. We look at it from a team perspective too, because Classy allows teams to unite. So how much are our teams fundraising as a whole? How much is that increasing year over year? What does that average team fundraise? What's the impact? So we know that if they pay to compete versus fundraise, a fundraiser will have 7 times as much impact as somebody who just pays the entry fee to compete. And of course, we love all of our competitors, no matter which approach they choose to take. But of course, we want them to fundraise because we know how impactful that can be. And so we even look at growing the split. So right now, about 20% of competitors at any given tournament will fundraise. So we want to flip that model on its head. So at our actually recent tournament in Connecticut, which is our sixth time there, we saw that move to about 50-50, which was really huge because almost every other tournament was 80-20. Yeah, so that is a great growth factor that we can look at and be really proud at. Of course, ultimately the gifts that we give to our beneficiaries and how much we're donating to them year over year, we want that to grow. So I'm very absurdly obsessive about spreadsheets and how much we're measuring, and so I can tell you exactly what happened at every single tournament, how many competitors we had, all the donations, everything, and we have all the information of every single donor that's ever donated to us because they've all come through Classy. So we're always measuring from that perspective, and there's so many different ways to improve there. And not only that, but also looking at the ways that we market. And in the beginning, we did as much marketing as we could, which was not a lot. And now we're able to do a whole lot more. So even looking at our paid media and the cost per conversion, and we want to drive that down, of course. And so we have countless metrics on that side to look at and to make sure that we're growing, so we can really monitor that. So even though we're still, it's myself and my wife and a lot of volunteers, and of course we're even looking at the growth of the volunteers that we have, and and how many volunteers are returning year after year. So we even care about, is this your sixth time volunteering for us? Because we want volunteers to come back. Not only do they get better at doing their jobs at events, but they become more passionate. And of course, if they compete in jiu-jitsu, they might also compete in the tournament, and they might fundraise and things like that, and donor nurturing and fundraiser nurturing. So there are so many different metrics, you can almost get lost in it, but that's what we really focus on, and hopefully someday we'll look at growth in a different way as far as growing like the size of our organization as well.
I love that you're talking about sort of data to insights to action, because it's so easy to get lost on each piece of that puzzle, right? You can get bogged down in all of the data and not factor out the insights. You can get kind of bogged down in the insights and not take the action. And it sounds like you, in the last tournament that you were talking about of changing or flipping that ratio, really did all of those pieces. Can you talk a little bit maybe about how you worked with your fundraisers to make that adjustment in how you were approaching the competitors for the organization itself?
So the biggest thing, one of the things you have to be careful when you're in an organization like ours, where there's only a few people actually working on it day to day, is scaling your time. And Danny Kim previously was talking about calories, and you want to burn calories on things that matter and otherwise. So we're always making sure we want to focus our efforts on what actually moves the needle. And so we needed to improve our marketing a lot. So we actually partnered with an agency called Media Cause, which allowed us to wholly improve our marketing in a lot of different ways. And one of the most important thing was our email. So I just didn't have time to do a good job with email and just communicating with our fundraisers, with our competitors, with our donors, and just letting them know what our progress was. And a donor from 2 years ago, this is what we're doing now, and we'd not only love you to come back, but also the fundraisers, we want them to come back year over year. So I think we saw a lot of that flip, not only because our most recent tournament was our 6th year there, so it's a much more mature tournament versus we're going to Buffalo for the first time in July, and everybody up there is like, tap who? What is this? So so they're brand new. So we actually do a lot more email and connecting with them, and we have a whole email program of, if they're a fundraiser and they sign up to be a fundraiser, they're going to get 5 emails, and after an hour they get an email that shows them how to set up their fundraising page. The next day, how to join a team and get their teammates together, and then the third one is about tips, and on and on. And so we were able to really empower the fundraisers to do more with that email. And also what we see year over year at tournaments is somebody might come to our first tournament and pay to compete. And then they see the top fundraisers getting awards and trophies and going to the merch table and picking up all of their items and hearing the stories. So we try to do a lot with capturing their stories and sort of why are you fighting and who are you fighting for. And then other people see, so we convert competitors who were paid competitors into fundraisers. And so obviously that's a massive impact. So not only telling our story so they can see what it means to be a fundraiser, but also communicating with them often.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah.
I think when we think about growth now at Teach for America, I mean, obviously we had a tremendous period of growth over 15 years where I think you think about growth in the traditional aspect, right? We're growing the number of core members who are coming in every year, and by virtue of that, we're growing the number of our alumni who are part of the program, and by virtue of that, we need to very dramatically grow our fundraising efforts. But now that we have reached scale, I think one of the things that my team and our organization is really focused on, which still requires growth, is like sustainability. Okay, once you have hit growth, how do you sustain that? And I think a key aspect of that is actually looking to grow new segments of donors. How do you actually find new people who are going to be engaged in your work? Because during growth campaigns and typical growth campaigns, people are willing to put down large sums of money to help you scale up, but then how do you sustain that level of giving when people see that as a one-time, like, let me help you grow investment? And the key to that is actually building out a much broader base of people who are now going to sustain your impact and sustain your work ongoing. And so the alumni work that we did with Classy was key to us because most of our alumni are teachers, are educators, so they're not going to be the major givers that in many ways helped fuel our initial growth, but they're obviously so committed to this work. I said before, many of them stay in this work. 66% are in education, 83% are working directly with low-income communities. So they're not going to be giving in large amounts, but they're committed to this for the long haul. And so one of the things that we did with Classy was figure out how do we harness the power of these people who have committed so much already and might want to also continue to support the organization that cares deeply about them. And so one of the challenges is we're a vast network. We're in 53 different regions, and our alumni are having lots of different experiences. And so we worked with Classy actually to develop a peer-to-peer fundraising engagement where alumni who really see the power of the network and the power of the community now that we are at scale to actually engage with each other and realize that what they have gained from Teach for America is obviously like their life passion, but also the people who are part of their community. And so over the past year, we ran a fundraising campaign with Classy to grow out this space, and we moved from quite low alumni rates of giving. About 4% of our alumni were giving, which is quite low, mainly because I think we were nervous about asking our alumni to give because they had already given so much. But with this peer-to-peer engagement, we're able to grow to 16% of our alumni, so quadrupling the percentage and actually sextupling the number, because another way that we think about growth now is even though we are no longer seeking to grow the incoming core size, that is staying steady actually, but our network continues to grow because every year we have a new class of core members, and every year our alumni gets bigger and bigger. And so in addition to like growing communities of donors, how do we grow and strengthen that network? And the alumni fundraising was one where we could see actually both of those ends could be served. Grow our community, grow our community of alumni, grow our community of donors.
Love to pull one piece of that thread. You were talking about sort of maybe being a little bit nervous about going out and asking your alumni because these people have already done and dedicated so much to being a part of your organization. What was the shift, or how did you all make the decision to say, you know what, we're going to go out there and we're going to do this campaign and try to grow?
I think it was a couple of things. I mean, one was we did look at university models, and that is one of their primary veins of giving. Also recognizing that it's a little different, right?
Yeah.
We are asking service of people too, and so asking them to serve in a different way through their fundraising dollars is a slightly different ask. But we also recognize, so I'm an alum of the program. I did Teach for America. I was a New York City core member. I taught high school English. I credit my life's work to joining Teach for America and totally changing the value schema by which I view the world and how I want to spend my life. And so I have an immense amount of gratitude to Teach for America as an organization. And so like we started to talk, put feelers out to alumni, and many people were very excited about this. And it's funny, I'm like a Classy ad now, but like there is like a...
This was not intentional.
It was not intentional. She did not plug me to do this. I am legitimately doing this. There were, a place where we actually wanted to gather data about why people chose to give to this campaign so we can think about what will motivate them next year. And the comments were just so beautiful and compelling, some talking about their students, a lot of them talking about their fellow core members and alumni, the impact that they have. And it is both just like beautiful, and I think why all of us do this work, right? Because we get to harness the excitement, the interest, the motivations of our donors, in this case also our alumni, and to hear that actually played back in a way that was so authentic and genuine was really beautiful. So we made the bet, and it really did work, and so we're excited to continue that now with more information on how to do it.
That's awesome. Ginny, what about you?
At the Exodus Road, we measure first and foremost the growth in our program. So how many victims are we rescuing? How many perpetrators are being arrested? And that's important. That drives everything else. From a financial aspect, from advancement, we're measuring those things that you're measuring. We're measuring the acquisition of donors. We're measuring how good are our retention programs. Are we keeping them? Are we migrating them maybe from a one-time or two-time a year supporter to a recurring donor? If they're a recurring donor, are we migrating them up so maybe they're giving a little bit more every year? We're looking at the length of time that a donor stays with us. So I can tell you for a recurring donor, our donors stay with us for about 15 months. So we're measuring that growth. How can we do that better? And then of course we're measuring the growth that we have in all of the channels that we use for funding to the organization. From a communication standpoint, our marketing department, we're measuring what are the visits, how many visits are we having to the website, what kind of social media following are we able to increase that social media following, what about advocacy? We have online abolitionists that are out there for us. We have people we have rock bands that are out there advocating on behalf of the Exodus Road. Who do we have out there? How is that growth? How are we doing in those things? And we're looking at them all the time, quarterly, weekly, monthly, and certainly annually. We publish an impact report that shows our donors and the general public how we've grown, where the money's being spent, and what we're doing.
I feel like across the board I heard some themes on communication and really kind of focusing around your supporters, your donors, understanding sort of who they are and how you're communicating with them. I'd love if we could dive a little bit deeper into some of the strategies and tactics that you all use around some of that growth.
I think one thing that can be dangerous when you're thinking about growth and fundraising is obviously it requires a certain amount of volume, right? Like if you're going to grow your number of funders, if you're going to grow the number of dollars, there's a lot of volume that has to happen. And I think the danger in that is that you can turn fundraising into a transactional engagement with donors as opposed to a relational one. And that's a real, and it's a real pressure that we feel every single year when you've got, real dollars that you need to raise. And so I think the focus that we try to have in our communications and how often we engage. Who is engaging? Is it like a mass blast, or is a local executive director reaching out to each alumni that they know personally? Obviously that can't happen completely all the time, but you've got to balance these different forms of communications, frequency of communication, deliverer, the person or method of delivering the communications in order to actually build relationships rather than this just feeling like, a transaction between you and the organization. Because again, I'm going to be hitting the theme of sustainability because that's what it really will take once you hit that growth period is like if you're really going to sustain people's funding to the organization, it has to be based on a relationship, right? People stay with organizations. They've stayed with Teach for America because they believe in the organization, they believe in the leadership, and they feel like it is an organization that helps them learn, helps them grow themselves. And so as we think about those communications, how can we be doing that in a manner that is relationship building rather than just another email that comes in asking for money?
Yeah.
And so I hinted at a couple of the ways. So we did do the peer fundraising. Actually hearing from peers and people is enormous. And we actually did try to leverage the relationships that were in all of our 53 regions. So we are a national organization. I work on the national development team. And so we provided a lot of the structure and a lot of the resources so that people could be engaging in this work. But then we relied on the relationships that existed in all of our 53 regions to help drive that. So you have a big mass communications from one of our well-known alumni. So like Kaya Henderson, who's the former DC Chancellor of Schools, is an alumni. So we had her send a blast, and she's like, maybe you don't know her. She's a celebrity in the education world. And so like people get an email from Kaya Henderson, but then it's followed up with personal relationships from their friends, their colleagues, the executive director, things like that. And then making the messaging a way that's accessing sort of what I talked about before, like their personal experience. How did this experience through going through Teach for America, affect them, affect their children, affect their lives? So
that's awesome. John, would you say like similar sort of personal experience is something that you guys are looking at in terms of a strategy or a tactic?
Yeah, I think what Mary said about balance is really key because we have a lot of different ways that we communicate with all of our different audiences. So even just understanding how many different audiences you have and how their needs differ, and then looking at ways to communicate and sort of how some of those are very elbow grease analog ways of communicating, and others can be more automated and digital. So of course we use email a lot, but we segment our lists quite extensively to understand, somebody who has just recently signed up to be part of our email list is way different than somebody who's donating to their niece who is competing at our tournament. We have newsletters that might go out to everyone, but then we also have very specific emails that might go to a fundraiser or a donor, and even down to the great thing about the collaborative is that word collaborative and learning. And on a previous panel, I heard a couple panelists talking about how when somebody signs up to be a fundraiser, they immediately call and say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. Awesome that you've signed up to be a fundraiser. Do you have any questions, and how can I help, and what's your story?" It was actually a storytelling panel. And I don't call our fundraisers, and so I was like, oh man, I need to do that. I don't know when I'm going to do that, but I need to do that because totally, especially most of our competitors, so there's 5 belts in jiu-jitsu, white, blue, purple, brown, black. So most competitors are white, and then it goes all the way down, and our fewest are black. Understandably, they get older and they get lazier. But so you're only a white belt for about 6 to 8 months, which means all of our white belts, which are most of our competitors, or at least the majority from a belt perspective, they didn't even know that Tap Cancer Out existed the last year. So like we were in Connecticut in 2016, so when our 2017 comes up, all of our white belt competitors didn't even train in jiu-jitsu the last time we were there. So not only are they new to jiu-jitsu, it might also be their first tournament, but they're probably new to fundraising as well. And so they're trying to figure all of this out. And even tonight I'll be visiting a school and I'll be training with them and I'll be telling them about Tap Cancer Out, and just being able to go there and sweating on the mats with them and not letting them, they're gonna kick my butt regardless, but that's a very analog way, and of course I can't visit every school out there. Right. But we can use email, and we can use social media. We use social media extensively, of course. We're live streaming this right now. So we have a lot of different ways to communicate. So it's understanding audiences and understanding all the different ways that you can communicate with them, and making sure that the messages are appropriate and timely and relevant, and sort of all of those things. But balance is sort of the key takeaway.
Yeah. So from those tips and tricks that you're kind of sharing with your fundraisers, are there any that you found to really resonate and kind of help move the needle in your fundraising growth? The tip that I tell everyone is giving thanks. So what we see time and time again, our top fundraisers from each tournament, without question, are doing something to thank their fundraisers. Usually it's just a weekly or semi-weekly post on Facebook that says, "Thanks so much to Bill, Sue, and Chris for their recent donation. I've almost reached my goal. I have 2 weeks till the tournament. Please help." And they're tagging them on Facebook. So it's sort of that recognition. And we all donate because we would like to help, but we also donate because we want recognition for donating too. So, saying thanks and giving thanks. Of course, reaching out to them personally and saying thank you, but the public thank you is huge. And one of our top fundraisers from our last tournament was doing a video diary almost every day throughout his fundraising journey, and thanking the donors in the video, and talking about his training, and talking about how it's his first tournament and he's so nervous. And so we see a lot of innovative ways, but it sort of all comes around that idea of thanks. So we have one email dedicated to just that one tip: say thank you. And it's time and time again we see it with all our top fundraisers. Yeah.
At the Exodus Road, our strategy for growth is not to become stagnant. So much is changing around us. Our donors are changing. What they want is changing. the world is changing, the economy is changing, and even if you take successful methodology, it doesn't mean it's going to work in the next year or the year after that or the year after that. So you constantly have to be evolving and changing. I come from a corporate America background. I've only been in this industry for like 15 months, so standing up here in front of you is really intimidating because you can teach me a lot more than I feel like I can teach you. But we have learned that we have to constantly be thinking about what do our donors need to make an informed decision on their charitable giving. And that when I stepped in, I knew a lot about this organization. I had supported the Exodus Road for 5 years. I had seen it grown from its infancy to this, $1.5 million organization. And so when I stepped on, I said, okay, here's what I want to have happen. I want our supporters to go from knowing to being. So they know about the Exodus Road, they know what we do. Now I want them to feel like they are the Exodus Road. And because of them, we're saving kids. Because of them, we're changing lives. And because of them, we're putting away these people that are exploiting, right? And so what we did, and we're smaller, John and I look at Mary and I'm like, okay, we got on the phone. We started picking up the phone, and it was literally 5 phone calls a day. And if we didn't have their phone number, we started emailing them. And I talked to people in Europe, I talked to people in Canada, I talked to whoever would talk to me, and you know what? I did a whole lot of leaving messages because they didn't pick up. When we got on the phone, we asked them, how's your experience with us? Do you like what you're getting from us? Do you know what's happening on the front lines? Do you want to know more? Are we just bugging the crap out of you or what? We're asking for their input, and they were giving it to us. So believe me, we had a lot of struggles along the way, but at the end of the year, in our year-end Classy campaign, we raised almost 400% more than we did the year before. And on Giving Tuesday, we raised over $82,000 when the previous year for the entire campaign had only raised 40. So my point is, it's that whole connection to your supporters, whether you're a $325 million organization or you're a $2 million organization or you're a $100,000 organization. It's that connection to your supporters and making them feel like they are your organizations because of them that you exist and that you are having the success that you're having.
I love that. I feel like we sometimes hear from organizations that we're working with that are like, well, no, we know what our donors need. And we're like, when's the last time you asked? And I love that you just picked up the phone and said, hey, we're gonna really ask the question of like, why are you giving to us? What's going on here? How can we better kind of understand and communicate with you? I love that.
And just one quick note. We thought at first, so when we see Giving Tuesday and we see that our goal was 80,000 and we hit 82, it's like mic drop. And then and we thought, well, maybe the thing was just a total fluke. Well, in March, we had our annual fundraising dinner. This is a very small community, Colorado Springs in Colorado, and it was almost 300% more. So it does make a difference. You connect with your people, they are going to stay with you. They have chosen your cause for a reason. There's a lot of compassion fatigue out there. People are being asked all the time, and there's a lot of worthy causes to give to, but they're fatigued. So once they choose you, you don't want to lose them. And so whatever it takes, we now, as we get bigger, we now have volunteers. They're on the phone. Hey, this is Sue from the Exodus Road. How are you doing? I'm not calling to ask you for anything. I just want to know if you're hearing from us enough. Did you hear about our latest rescue in India? So it's just that, it's that human connection.
I love that. It's looking at that human connection and how do you continue to do that at growth and at scale, and it really is what we see a lot of times differentiating organizations who are seeing success in their donor communications and their fundraising communications is really kind of creating that human experience and that human element and that personal touch. Love all of that. I'd love to kind of jump ahead and talk a little bit about maybe a lesson learned along the way in growth. Like, what's one of the hard ones? What did you kind of wish you knew before, and now today, as a smarter, wiser person for this room full of people, don't want them to go down that same path?
I guess overall, the lesson I learned is I need to take a mutual fund approach to raising money for the organization. You know, we had great success in our relationship building with our high net worth donors. We had great success with the relationship building with our general donation population, but I didn't really realize the runway I needed for grants, and I realized way too late. So in about July of last year, it was another moment where I was like, this is going to be bad. I mean, we are receiving grants, but if those grants, you know, foundations or grant makers, those dollars aren't guaranteed year after year after year. So, you know, we lost some runway, and I'm glad to say that unfortunately I wasn't here yesterday because I hired a grant writer. So I'm super excited about that.
Adapt and overcome.
For us, that was definitely an issue. But just to take a more, you know, to be thinking ahead about if that major gift donor goes away, what do I have? If that foundation, if they don't support us next year, what do I do? If I lose, you know, this particular partnership with the business, what do I do? It's just having that, again, that mutual fund approach to your support raising.
Awesome. Any other?
With us, so obviously the tournaments are pivotal to what we do, but that limits us in that they are based, you know, they're physical. So, and they're mostly in the Northeast, other than our San Diego tournament where all the classy folks come out and volunteer, which is awesome. But so I didn't realize, well, I did realize sort of that my time was not scalable. So eventually I would run out of time to host all of these tournaments. And obviously it's an easy formula to say, add tournaments, add revenue. And so, okay, so when do I stop? 6 tournaments, 12 tournaments? Like eventually I'm not seeing my kids any weekends because I'm going to Iowa to host another tournament. And one of the things you learn in peer-to-peer fundraising as well is sort of the power of empowering volunteers and fundraisers and people who want to support you. So for years, people would email me and say, hey, I'm in Denver and you don't have a tournament out here. How can I help? And I didn't have an answer for them other than, hey, we have some merchandise on our store that you can buy. But I didn't have anything to give them or you know, hey, drive to one of our tournaments or fly to one of our tournaments. It's obviously not feasible. So it's taken quite a while for us to sort of get to this point, but we're actually building something separate from tournaments called Grapplethons. So we had a lot of people reaching out and saying, hey, I'm gonna, you know, our instructor's son has cancer, we want to help him out, or our friend has cancer, we want to help him out. We're gonna have this event, you know, some would call it a roll-a-thon or a grapple-thon or whatever. It was just a bunch of jiu-jitsu folks getting together to train and to learn and to honor someone, and they wanted us to send merch. So we would send merch, and then eventually it was like, well, this is a great way for someone to help Tap Cancer Out that can't come to one of our tournaments. So we've developed the Grapplethon program, which are completely volunteer-run events. And this is, so Barbells for Boobs is a sort of a comp for us. They're very similar to us, but they do things completely opposite. Their first event was their last event. After that, it's all CrossFit gyms hosting their own events. And we were trying to be the ones who are hosting all the events, and eventually you can't do that anymore. So now it's sort of, how do we give our volunteers and those in the jiu-jitsu community who are passionate about helping us, how do we give them the tools to host their own events? And with the Classy platform, and you guys aren't going to believe that Classy asked us to talk about that, but it's so crucial to everything that we do. You can't help but talk about it. So it's so easy now with the Classy platform and the peer-to-peer fundraising that if somebody reaches out, we've developed a toolkit. So this is exactly how to start. We've got the posters already designed for you. We just changed, the date and the city. And we're going to set up the fundraising page for you. We got the email program all set up, so your fundraisers are going to get these 5 emails. And we have the perk levels already, so we know exactly how much you need to fundraise to get in. And we have sponsors already on board. If you want to host a Grapplethon, you're going to get stuff from Inverted Gear and Armor Kimonos and that you can give away as raffle prizes or whatever. So sort of giving them all the tools that they need to go and use their passion to support us and run their own events. And I don't have to fly out there. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, I wish I had known earlier sort of how passionate everyone was to help us and had put together those tools to empower them to sort of go off and do something that isn't too dangerous to sort of the Tap Cancer Out brand. I don't want someone running their own tournament, because that can be awful if it's an awful experience, and the experience is very important to us as well. But if they're hosting their own event inside their school, that's just fun and really just gathers the community for a cause and allows them to fundraise and tell their story on top of that, it can be very powerful. And that's a way, especially because we're talking about growth, that's key to us scaling and growing without having to add more people and spend more time away from home. So sort of leaning into the people in our community to help, that could help us scale who knows how much.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I'll be quick because I know we want to get to questions. The thing that I first thought is exactly what Jeannie said, so I just want to double endorse the concept of building out a pipeline and community of people, because when I started at Teach for America several years ago, we were just coming off of our growth phase where we had relied on wonderful, incredibly generous people to give major gifts to help us grow as fast as we did. But we were at a point where we were relying on a large portion of our budget from a very small number of organizations and individuals, and that's a scary place to be in, because you cannot rely on that year over year over year. People are generous and people are going to stay with you, but what people are willing to give at every level is going to change when you're no longer in that growth phase. And so just double endorse that. But since that, without going more, since Jeannie spoke well to that, I think the second thing, which is going to sound a little bit wonky, but I actually think it is so important, is I really believe good fundraising is good fundraising. Again, to Jeannie's point, I don't think the fundamentals change whether you're a $100,000 budget or $300 million budget. You need to thank people. You need to have good relationships. You need to do all the basics of fundraising. The operationalizing of all of those things is much more complex when you get to a growth phase. And I think a lot of the challenges we faced because we grew so quickly was we didn't always have the reporting, the data, the CRM that you needed to actually track all this. And actually, I've got some data quality and technology people in the house right now on my team. And this is fundamental to our ability to actually ensure that we have good relationships, good insight into what our donors care about, who they are, and are we doing the things we need to do to build relationships and be good stewards of their generous funds, but also so that they are continuing to learn and grow with us. And so making sure that your systems, your processes grow with you. Notes can no longer be inside of a moleskin, tucked in someone's back seat of their car. Yeah, it's got that type of thing. And there's many more of these processes and systems that I'm talking about. But making sure that as you grow your systems and infrastructure and capabilities to match that, because ultimately, again, that sounds like a little internal baseball, but it's about how do we set us up to have relationships with our people, and you need that.
Yeah. We talk a lot about that at Class A, sort of relationships at scale. How do you have relationships at scale, right? Because you got to have, to grow, you need both. I know that we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions, so I'm going to pause and see if there's any audience questions.
Hi, I'm Alicia from Vitamin Angels, and we are an organization of about 40 people, and right now we're starting, with Class C, really trying to utilize our fundraising and, really harnessing those individuals who are interested, but we don't have someone who's really dedicated to all of that engagement, really calling our fundraisers and, keeping up with those relationships. So do you have any advice on how to triage or prioritize that outreach and make it work for organizations that don't have that bandwidth or capacity of larger organizations?
Executive director? Alicia, are you the executive director? No? I don't know if this is the right response, but it's the first thing that came to mind is, I do think whoever it is, even if you don't have a massive development staff, there should be someone who feels that it is their job and charge to maintain the most important relationships. However you define them, that prioritization is going to look different and, depending on your context. But I will just share as an example, Wendy Kopp, who was the founder of Teach for America and, is an unbelievable fundraiser, up until the very end, until she stepped down, and actually even still, she's on our board still, even when she was running a massive organization, like donor calls, donor relationships, donor meetings, writing, I mean, the woman, I don't know how she did it, like wrote personal thank you notes, handwritten notes to some of the most important donors. And obviously, like, you've got to prioritize and figure out who are those people. But I think division of labor and clarity on the importance of that, maybe that's not the most helpful answer, because I feel like it's just like tell someone to do it, but that is my honest response, is that development fuels the work, and it's not possible without those relationships and those people.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree with Mary. Our founders talk about how, three coffee meetings, a lunch meeting, a dinner meeting. They were constantly out talking to people, developing those relationships, building those relationships, because really what drives what you're doing is going to be the people that are going to support it. So that just has to be, that's your foundation. That's really critical. And it's hard. I was talking to my founder. I'm like, what advice do I give to people that are just getting started? And he's like, it's 2 years of a lot of work, and it's, you're not going to make any money, and it's just being out there and doing it because you're passionate about it and you love it, and you want others to love it too. So there's not an easy fix by any means. Good luck.
We definitely have the same exact issue that you have. I mean, having no paid employees, it's really difficult for us to do that sweat equity. And I do it as much as I can. And we have volunteers that will help us write thank you cards and other things. But one thing that we learned throughout this was so prioritizing is obviously really important. And it's not just, okay, our top 10 donors, we need to reach out to them. Our top 10 fundraisers, we need to reach out to them. That's sort of obvious. One of the things we noticed, so most of our fundraisers, because our tournaments are intentionally as spread out as we can get them, we want competitors really only competing in one tournament. They can compete as many as they want, but we try to stretch them out and reach new audiences, because people generally only fundraise once a year. I only fundraise once a year. I'll do it for our Connecticut tournament, and that's it. Because donors get burnt out if you're asking for money every other week. But we found a fundraiser who, she was never our top fundraiser. She was sort of in the top 10, which usually gets lost amongst, we're awarding our top 4 fundraisers, so we may not ever say her name. But we noticed that she fundraised 3 consecutive tournaments. That she went to 3 different tournaments, only one of which was actually close to where she lived. And no one fundraises 3 times in a row. And she would have fallen sort of through the cracks if we didn't look at the data and start to see, oh, actually she shows up on 3 different lists. Why is that? And then found out that her father, and she did it all this year and last year, and her father had passed away from pancreatic cancer. So obviously, because Pancreatic Cancer Action Network is our beneficiary, it resonated with her. And then we went and we filmed her story, and she told us her story, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house, because it was just so moving, and like how relevant Tap Cancer Out was for her because of pancreatic cancer, and the fact that she trained jiu-jitsu and she didn't know how to honor her father. And so by sort of sifting through the data and looking for unique elements, so beyond just the top fundraisers, we're able to identify someone who is a really powerful advocate for Tap Cancer Out, even if she wasn't always the top fundraiser and raising a ton. But over aggregate, she was raising more than a top fundraiser at a single tournament. So trying to look for those people as well, and prioritizing them. But of course, sweat equity is hard to scale. So.
Hi, thanks for doing this panel. I work for a 23-year-old foundation in San Francisco. We fund the Safety Net Hospital there, and we're recently switching into a growth mode. This was endorsed by our board, supported by them, have a long-range strategic plan. At the executive level, we're ready to go. But at the board level, we're running into roadblocks with those who really initiated this process for us, primarily in the budgeting space, year to year. Any suggestions you might have for keeping the board engaged on growth as a front and center approach to year-over-year functionality of the foundation or of a nonprofit? Thanks.
At the Exodus Road, we've been extremely fortunate with our board. They are very growth oriented, and they're really more of a governance board, and have been really supportive of all of our efforts. So I don't know, Mary, if that's something you could speak to, or with your board.
Can I ask the barrier? What is it? Just the finances they're concerned about? Like, what is the barrier? Because I think that it's different depending on.
Yeah,
reason.
They're stuck with finances, but your budgets year to year. They're stuck with the modus operandi as it's been, and so they're not willing to scale budget to meet growth projections that we want to ramp into by 2020.
Do you believe you have the fundraising base to reach those benchmarks?
If we make some investments, yes.
We make some yes. Invest in development. Okay, so I have. I don't know the circumstances of your board, so that's obviously hard. And to be transparent, I was a teacher when we were starting the growth phase at Teach for America. So I have less insight into the initial decision making, but my initial thoughts are. One is sometimes having an external person come in and talk about development rather than just the development staff can be helpful. I don't know if you can get someone who's just an external consultant willing to do it pro bono, or someone who can add a lens, maybe someone from another organization that is scaled. I can maybe talk to them. I don't know, someone who has gone through this process and explained what it takes in terms of development investment, as well as showing that actually based on an external perspective this seems feasible. So that's one thought. And then the second thought, which I can't speak to your board, but just a sort of underscoring of the importance of boards and their own giving and their own investment. I don't know how to get your board there except for the first suggestion, but I will say I think a lot. I work with our governance committee of our national board, and the importance of building a board that understands the importance of development, is willing to do development, and hopefully actually give their own funds, whatever that means for them. The way we frame it is not actually a numerical give-get. We talk about it being their most significant philanthropic capacity, one of their most significant philanthropic commitments, which actually also allows us to diversify our board. So, for some people that looks like a much more significant dollar amount than another person, but actually in terms of their investment, given their capacity, it's all across the map. So I don't know, that second point is less helpful now because you've got the board you've got, but just as a broader lesson, the importance of board building and their investment in development up front. I hope that's helpful.
Is your current board a fundraising board? Would you sort of categorize them as a board that is invested in fundraising for your organization?
Yeah, a lot of the fundraising for years was really network. Local network. I know this person. I can get them to give us money, and corporations, which is we're really blessed with a great portfolio of corporate supporters. It's getting outside of our echo chamber, the people that our board knows, and the fundraising that they do for us on their own behest. We do raise a fair amount of money from our own board. It's the advancement beyond that sort of core group that. There's a big diversity in age, there's a big diversity in giving, and there's a big diversity in terms of workforce, who's working for whom, especially in a city like San Francisco. So it's really great support. We just to give you one last example of the obstacles, one of our investments was a feasibility study for a campaign, and that was shot down. Wow. And if you're not shocked by that, I don't know what to tell you. But so we reformatted it as a campaign strategy consultant. We're going to do the same stuff, but we're going to spend a little less, not get as much, but we're stopping talking about feasibility.
Have you shown them, because there are studies, and I just actually went through something like showing what a standard return on investment is for development staff and what your ROI basically can and should be? Okay. I'm out of ideas.
I know. I'm like, all right, I'm going to throw one more at you. One of the things that in an organization that I worked with previously, obviously not at Classy, but in my nonprofit life before coming to Classy, we worked a lot to get the board involved in a longer term growth plan. So we weren't trying to just sort of pick at it year over year and said, here's where we're trying to go. Here's kind of the vision that we see for the organization. And we want to get you bought in on this long term. So if we had that vision in place, then you can kind of back into some of the shorter term growth things that might make them a little bit more bought in. It sounds like you may have already done that too. You're giving me the nod.
Yeah.
You've done all the ideas.
You've done everything you can. We feel you.
It's cool. We feel you. Boards can be tough.
I'm curious, how much success have you had, and how does your strategy change when you think about approaching a business or corporation to become a donor versus individuals?
I've had this much success. In the corporate world, we're learning, we're growing. And so the last presentation that I went to was about CSR, and it was really interesting because it's gone from a cause-related giving to a way that you can work with a corporation that they can, for example, for us, we are working with this large technology company that provides equipment that we can use in our investigative work. We're able to pull a lot of information off of a trafficker's phone that might connect him to places and people around the world. That corporation, the equipment that they gave us is worth about $400,000. You know, are we going to get? We're trying to get that check too. We're looking at matching matching with their employees, but to be able to enter into that partnership and get that kind of a gift from them is huge, right? It goes to the bottom line. It goes to our programs. It helps us find and free these victims. But what we're trying to do, and I brought this stone with me for two reasons. It connects me. Our stones for us connect us to the victims of human trafficking. So it takes a problem that's 45 million people and it brings it down to one life, right? So what we're doing on a corporate scale is when I walk into GoPro, I put a blank rock on his desk and I say, that's a life. How can we work together to rescue that life? I want to put those stones on each of your employees' desk, and I want to give them a Sharpie pen that when a rescue happens and we tell you about it, they know that what they do every day for GoPro is going beyond what GoPro is doing to rescuing somebody in India, in the United States, in South America, in Southeast Asia. So that's what we're trying. I mean, again, our success is, I'm going to tell you right up front, it's been minimal in the corporate world, but these are the things that we're trying to kind of push out and get them in the heart, and then also get those in-kind donations that are really crucial and helpful. Does that help? Good.
I can speak a little bit to that. So Teach for America's funding is pretty diversified. It's about 33% individuals, 31% foundations, 26% state and district funding, and then I think 5% corporate, and the remainder is federal. Corporate obviously is our smallest segment, and it's a challenge because I think, speaking to what Jeannie is saying, like a lot of what I think corporate institutions are looking for is employee engagement, and given our model and that we place teachers in schools, like we don't control the schools. So while we've tried employee engagement opportunities, that sounds like a great one, and easier, like we've actually struggled to find easy ways to make employees feel connected to our organization, given both the scale that we operate and therefore like what that would take to operationalize, as well as just given the structure of how we work, that we don't control the schools that our teachers work in. We don't have that same level. So one of the things we're thinking about this year, and actually what we're trying to invest in, is like trying to figure out how can we make products or packages or ways that our corporations can feel the value at different levels of investment, because that seems to be a huge key for the corporate giving.
I'd say one thing to remember just in corporate fundraising is that it's not in a lot of ways all that different from individual fundraising in the sense that people give to people. And so the same thing that you're saying, I'm making a human experience and I'm making this a personal experience for my donor, you're doing the same thing. It just happens to be somebody that's sitting and has a title at a corporation. You're still making a personal ask, a personal relationship, and you're creating that in a way that gets you a bigger and a bigger ask in terms of the corporate dollars. But the same way that we're talking about personal fundraising going in that direction of really being that human experience, it's the same thing for your corporate sponsor. It's less transactional and more relationship based. So from a corporate perspective, are you figuring out a way to really engage those employees and have it not just be a check from a corporation, but also an experience for those employees to get involved, whether you have volunteer opportunities at your organization or if there's other ways that they can get involved directly in fundraising, depending on, I have no idea what your organization does, but depending on what your organization does, just kind of think about it from that personal aspect. I feel like in one of the organizations I worked for, we were 80% corporate funded, and people could get their heads really wrapped around the fact that it was like corporations, right? Like Google. But really, they're just people that are giving to you. We're getting the big wrap-up sign. So I just want to thank all of you so much for coming and being a part of this panel. I hope that you all are walking away with some great insights in terms of growth. Our keynote panel is getting started in about 15 minutes down on the main stage. Look forward to seeing you all there. I love it.